What's up, DIY Queens? It's your design bestie, Kara Newhart, and this is Make Space.
Okay, today's episode I'm very excited about because I was like, what should we talk about? And then I decided to pick up this journal, which is something that I wrote, and I decided we would flip to a random page, and that would be what the universe wants me to share with you. So I opened the page randomly, and we landed on the section about cultivating your creativity. And the funny part about this is that in the episode with Dean, who was a chef, we talked a lot about like the creative process and how it includes like messing up and trial and error and a lot along those lines. And then you guys had like a lot of questions, like follow up questions. So it does feel like this is what we're supposed to be talking about right now. So this feels like cheating a little bit because it's like past me like wrote notes on what to tell you. But it's also nice because if you get the journal, you can like follow along and do this process for yourself. And we're not going to talk about all the questions, so there'll be some that you can do as a follow up to this episode. But yeah, I want to talk about creativity, kind of like what the process is, and kind of help you shift your mind from thinking of creativity as like a trait, like it's something that you are or a talent that you have innately, and more of like a muscle, like something you can practice and a skill you can like get good at. Let me find the right page. Hold please. To understand creativity, it's basically creativity is how you approach the creative process. So if the creative process is the marathon, creativity is the running, right? And so you can learn how to be a better runner, but the marathon, the process doesn't really change. It has the same like cycles and tenets of like there's a starting line and there's times and there's um running numbers and medals. And so the process is pretty consistent, but your approach can be totally different from person to person. So let's first dive into the creative process. So creating something has many phases, and I want you to recognize that you may be stronger at some versus others, and understanding which those are can help you like creatively trust yourself and also know when you're going to need extra help and support um, when you dig deeper to translate your creative inspiration into like the actual space. So, creativity essentially is taking an idea, being inspired, taking inspiration, turning it into a concept, like an actual plan with maybe some step by step things, being able to communicate that plan, like into what are we actually going to do, um, and then getting hands on, like actually doing the steps of the plan that you thought up, pivoting and reworking. So when you get hands on and you discover new things that you didn't anticipate in your plan, you make pivots or you rework things and you make adjustments based on it, how it actually went, and then fine tuning the details. So that is like the 6 steps of creativity. And these are the same every single time. So there always will be an inspiration, whether that is like you see a beautiful rug and you're like, "Ooh, I should redo my whole living room." Or whether you have like a problem, like you walk in your house and you trip over everybody's shoes and you're like, "Ugh, I should really redo this mudroom." Um, or whether it's not redoing a whole room. There's like probably better examples, but no matter what, there's going to be a moment of inspiration that either comes from a problem you're trying to solve, something you saw, something that inspired you. It could be anything. And then you're going to make a concept. The concept would be like, what do I need to do to fix this problem? The plan is like, what's the step by step of like what that actually looks like? Then you actually start doing it and then you pivot and all of that. So um, that process is the same like every single time. And then getting in touch with your own creativity is how you actually like go about that process. So I have a good part that I want, a good quote that I want you to hear. And it's creativity is letting yourself make mistakes, and design is knowing which one to keep. I can't tell you how many times I've like made a mistake on a project and it actually led to something even better than I initially thought. Like, totally messed something up, but because then I had to fix it or solve that problem, it became like better than I ever initially imagined. And so I've come to call that like the magic is in the messy middle, and understanding that a lot of the magic of creativity is in the middle after you've like ripped things apart and are trying to get them to go back together. That's when you can make really amazing things. But basically, being creative is something you have to practice. It takes time to develop the skill. It takes experimentation, and it takes having the courage to let yourself make mistakes. Making mistakes is one thing, like on accident. Letting yourself make mistakes and not like shaming yourself for it or getting stuck because of it is like a whole other thing. So it's not that you're just not creative. I hear this all the time from people, specifically commenting on my DIY projects, like, I'm not creative, or like, you're so creative, I wish I was too. And it's like, most of us just haven't spent enough initial, like, intentional time nurturing and developing our creativity. So when it comes to use it, we feel like weak, we feel incapable, and we doubt our ability to be creative or come up with designs and ideas. And it's like a muscle where if you didn't work out and you haven't been practicing strengthening that muscle, when it's time to use it, it's not going to magically appear. And it's not that you like aren't creative, it's that you just haven't like honed this skill. And this can look like not being like, this can look like being scared to try. It can look like not knowing how to even get started. Like, I don't know what I don't know, so I don't even know where to start. It can look like turning to others for inspiration because we don't really know how to create our own. Like, when you don't know how you can consistently get inspiration or what inspires you, you may need to look to others to figure out kind of how the process works. It can also look like comparing our process to someone else's and comparing our way of running the marathon to someone else's, which if you are a beginner marathon runner and you're comparing yourself to someone really seasoned, you're going to get disappointed because you're like, wow, they're so good and it looks so easy for them. Like, yeah, it looks easy for them because they've done this a lot and they've practiced, not because they're just naturally better at it than you. So, yeah, first give yourself grace. Know that this is like a process and a journey and a skill we're honing. And also know that like this is something we're not necessarily encouraged to do in our culture. Like things like coloring in the lines, like stay in the lines, don't have your own ideas. Or just kind of like how, through elementary, it's like, here's your colors and here's your crayons. And then in middle school, it's like, no more crayons. And now we don't do as much art, we don't do as much play, and we don't do as much experimentation. And now there's like really rigid processes we're going to learn, which has value too. But I think creative processes aren't taught to us like other things are that are more systematic. And so we don't know how to do them as much. So in this episode, we're just going to explore how to unlock your creative power for yourself. So to uncover your creativity, I like to ask you to think like backwards and think of like if there was a moment or time in your life where you felt uncreative. I don't know if that's a word. Or if you felt like closed off to your creativity. I know that like for my sister, my littlest sister, who is very creative, but at one point a teacher told her she wasn't. Like there was some specific project and her teacher said she wasn't creative. And so she like internalized that and was like, okay, I'm not a creative person. I'm a logical person. And then kind of like closed herself off to her creativity. So this could be a moment where someone judged something you made, where someone judged something you did, or like didn't recognize your creativity. Or it can be a moment where you did that to yourself and you decided like, I'm not good at this. It's not something I have. It's not something I'm going to like attempt anymore. And so going back to recognize when you like, basically when you cut yourself off from your own creative power is going to help you flip that switch back on. So if there was a time when you decided you weren't creative, when somebody said something hurtful that made you feel like this wasn't possible for you, identifying that is going to help you switch this switch back on, because I believe everyone's creative, and it's just getting to know your own unique process, which is going to look so different from anyone else's. Okay, so once we're uncovering kind of like where your creative power went, or when you decided it wasn't a thing, the next is to start to cultivate your creative confidence. And what this means is your confidence is based on a few things. Number one, what you know, like feeling like you're competent and you have knowledge about something. And number two, having kind of evidence that you can do something. So, like confidence with power tools, let's say. I know how to use them. I know conceptually best practices of how to use them. And evidence, like I have literally used them to build things that turned out really good. So I'm very confident using tools because I have experience to rely on that has shown me I'm capable of it and I know enough. And so if you're feeling unconfident when it comes to creativity, it might be because you either don't know enough about the creative process or you don't have any experiences in being creative, in doing this process that you can point to and be like, see, I'm good at this, or see, that's what creativity looks like for me. So the first part of unlocking this is kind of getting clear on your own creative approach and developing more confidence around your personal creative process. So the first part of this is inspiration. And so I think for some people, they have really consistent inspiration where they're just kind of like constantly inspired and they're very sure of themselves. Like when they get inspiration, it's like, yep, I know it and I feel it. And it's like an aha moment almost. Other people, inspiration isn't as like instant and clear. It can be something that builds. It can be something you have to like kind of think about and dwell on. For me, creative, like inspiration's pretty instant. Like if I see something, I'm like, yes, that, but I'm doing it this way. And then like we have this whole project plan. So the inspiration is very quick, but not everybody is like that. And so I think that can be a challenge for some people when you're looking at someone like me whose inspiration is very quick and you don't have that. You think like, oh, I'm not inspired. But the trick is to figure out what inspiration looks like to you. Like, when do you feel inspired? What are the types of things that inspire you? Is it people, like having a conversation? Is it visual, like seeing something? Is it problem solving? Like I get really inspired by if there's a problem, like I'm inspired to like fix it and like think of a creative solution to fix it. So knowing like what types of things most inspire you, like a reliable source of inspiration for you is kind of the first step of this. So like what sparks your creativity? How do you get these creative ideas? Is it a feeling? Is it a conversation? Is it something visual? Is it music? Is it you spend time deep in thought? Is it the shower? Like you get your best ideas in the shower or when you go for a walk. And often you'll find that you're most receptive to inspiration when you're in kind of like a relaxed, neutral state. So things like taking a shower or going for a walk or listening to music, you're not necessarily like active and you're not necessarily like being a vegetable, like laying on the couch and scrolling your phone, although that can be something too. But kind of like this neutral space is often the best place to receive inspiration. And then after you get this inspiration, the next step is to turn it into a concept. So when you receive the inspiration, what does your process look like for turning it into a concept? So like an example of this would be like if I saw a color palette I really liked, like how would I take that inspiration of like, ooh, I love that, and translate it into something like an actual idea that I could do? So a color palette turning into like a room, or a color palette turning into like a piece of art that I'm going to make. But the room is maybe the best example. So like, okay, this blue, ooh, I'd love to have a blue chair, and that color would be really good on the walls, and this other color would be really good for the ceiling. And so how are you taking that inspiration and kind of translating it into like an actual, more firm idea of what you want to do. So a concept is the idea of like what you can actually envision in your head. Another good example is like I found this fireplace mantle on Marketplace. So the inspiration was I'm scrolling along and I see this beat up mantle for real cheap. And so I was like, ooh, I want a fireplace. So I'm inspired. Like, it is time for a fireplace. And then the concept is like, okay, well, if I got this mantle, since it doesn't have a back, I could build built-ins, put it on the front, put a little plug, and then have some plug-in logs and like make a built-in fireplace that has storage. So that's like the concept. And then on to formulating a plan. Okay, plan for the fireplace, like how wide do the shelves need to be? How far should it stick out from the wall? What paint color should it be? What should I do for the bottom? I ended up doing plaster, spoiler alert. But the plan is like the step-by-step and the details to how you're going to execute the concept. And so you can start to see how some people might be better at other parts. Like detailed people might get real into the measurements of how deep the shelves are going to be and sketching it all out and the structure. Other people are like, oh, this great idea, but like, how do I actually make it happen? Like, so depending on your personality and your strengths, different pieces of this process might feel easier to you or better. So for the people that are really into the concept, like I have a strong vision, but I don't know how to make it happen, like you might need someone to help you with the plan or help you build it. For people that are really good at plans, you might need someone to help you come up with the concept and like tell you what paint color you should use or what the texture should be on it, stuff like that. So once you have your plan, you're like, okay, here's what I'm gonna build. You can get hands-on. And as you start building it, something will always go wrong or different than you thought it was going to go. And so you'll have moments where you're like, okay, well, I thought the shelves were going to be 12 inches out, but actually there's these baseboards here and I don't want to remove them. So now we'll make them, whatever it is. But there's always something that you maybe didn't quite anticipate or is a little bit different than you thought. Or as you get into it, you realize, ooh, this actually, now that I did it, it doesn't look the same as my head and something's off and I need to change it, which could be a paint color. It could be adding some trim. It could be the scale of things, many different things. And if you're lucky, you thought of a lot of details in your plan and it's going great. And if you're like me, you made a very vague plan and you kind of need to visualize things. And so you kind of only know what to change after you're in process. And so you repaint things 20 times. But that's part of my process and that I'm like willing to accept. Okay, so we're getting hands-on, we're building it, and then we come to the part where we need to pivot and rework. And so that's where we're like making these changes, making these fixing things when we really messed it up. And so that's like circling back to our initial plan and revising as we go. That is a very natural part of the creative process. This is why I always say, like, it's okay to make mistakes, let yourself experiment, let yourself fail. Like, it's almost inevitable in the creative process that there will be times when you get stuck or you fail, like guaranteed. And this is something I used to get really hung up on, especially as I did things again and again. It's like, I've done this so many times. Like, why am I messing it up now? But what I realized is like growth and creating things isn't a straight line. Like, look at nature. Like, no tree is perfectly straight and it grows and adapts and changes to its environment. And that's the same thing with creativity. It's not like a perfectly linear, smooth process. Like, there's up and downs, it's a roller coaster, and there's definitely hard parts. So I gave you some questions for kind of how to explore your creativity. There's a few more in the journal if you want to look that up. But in terms of the like kind of reflecting on this process to realize where you land, a good question to ask yourself is like, which part of the creative process do I enjoy the most or am I the best at? Are you really good at having ideas and starting things? Are you really good at making that detailed plan? Are you really good at like the hands-on work? Are you really good at problem solving when it's time to pivot? And that's where you find your magic. That's my favorite, which is like a weird, unexpected favorite. It's like, I like to mess up and make changes to what I thought was going to work. But that's the part I like. And then what part of the creative process do you struggle with the most and find the most challenging for you? And kind of like, how can you search for support around this? Like, how can you find someone to come help you? Whether it's like someone hands-on, whether it's like phoning a friend for emotional support, but realizing that like you might not naturally be great at the entire process. Like there's parts that are going to be easier than other parts. And yes, you can practice and get good at the whole thing, but also you can seek support and have people come in and help you when it's like not your strength. So that's kind of like an overview of the creative process, because I feel like when people talk about like creativity or making things or being creative, like it's kind of like a vague concept that we often associate with like art or like painting or like artists. And very rarely do we notice creativity as like a holistic, like cyclical process, and one that's like very structured and consistent each time. Like every single time you're making something, you will follow the same process of like inspiration, concept, process, revisit, and then you do it all again. And so when you understand like the process is kind of fixed, your way of navigating the process is personal and something that you're going to have to like get used to about yourself. You're going to have to learn like where your strengths are, what parts you like, what parts you don't like, how you approach things, how you get inspiration, how do you make a plan. When you kind of realize that's personal and up to you, and it doesn't have to look the same as everybody else's. Like the best example is like me and my best friend Jessie. So Jessie doesn't do really intense like mood boards. Like when she does a mood board, it's like an inspiration photo, like a color, and then she just kind of like starts putting the space together. My mood board is basically like a detailed design plan where I take a photo of the room, I drag in all the products I've bought and overlay them on the actual photo to see what it's going to look like. Like I really have to visualize to a T. And so my concept is a lot more like firm, where hers is a lot more loose. And so her concept, it's like she's really bringing things to life in the hands-on phase, where I feel like the hands-on phase for me, I'm just kind of on autopilot, like executing the plan that I made like before. There's not a lot of second guessing unless we mess up or unless I look at something and I'm like, oh, that's not right. Then we change the plan. But until then, we're just like, do, like I already know what I'm doing because I made this really detailed concept. Where hers is like she's kind of making it up as she goes, and the concept is kind of vague. And so the end result is like really incredible spaces and amazing before and afters. But the way we got there from point A to point B is so different. And I think there's so many layers, not just in that, like, it's like we've been over the concept of like the before and after are snapshots of the space, a specific point in time. And there's a lot that happens in between them. But not only is there like a lot you don't see, but there's like many different approaches that you could take to get from the same A to B, if that makes sense. So yes, your creative process is something you're going to have to practice. It takes a lot of like looking at yourself and kind of self-awareness around like how you do things or how you like to do things. And I think once you can think of creativity in that way versus thinking of it as like this elusive thing, trait that you have or you don't, once you realize it's a process that you can like practice, it just becomes a lot easier and way more empowering and way more like doable. And then also knowing that you're going to mess up 100%. You're going to mess something up. There's going to be a problem, a challenge, a pain point, and you will have to pivot. Like that is guaranteed. I guarantee you that will happen. And so if you know that going in, when something goes wrong, inevitably, you're not going to look at yourself and be like, oh, I'm not good at this. I messed up. You're going to be like, okay, this is part of the process. And now it's time to pivot. And now it's time to problem solve. And this is just part of the creative process. It's just always how it goes. And that mess up may be different every time and it may occur at a different point, but it's always going to happen. So then, yeah, you get grace because it's like, it's not you, it's the process. And it's like supposed to happen. So this, yeah, I really like, it's like, creativity is a lifelong journey. So don't feel like you're going to like listen to this episode and suddenly be in touch with your creativity. It's something that you have to practice. But I would say as you go on to tackling projects or making crafts or like whatever you're making, try to identify like where you're at in the process as you're doing things. Like try to link it back to one of those 6 phases, because then you're more clearly see like how you move through this process and your personal approach. Because once you can understand that, like creativity is so much easier and you can make accommodations for how you like to do things, and you can breeze through the parts that are easy and you can get help in the parts that aren't. So I hope that, I feel like that was kind of conceptual, but I hope there was still some like practical tips and insight into helping you navigate this. Creativity is can be such an abstract thing to discuss, but I hope I gave you some structure to work with and a springboard for kind of getting in touch with your own creative process and approach. And if you need more help, you should get this book, which is called The Make Space Journal. And I walk you through, there's a whole section dedicated just to this, as well as all kinds of other sections that will help walk you through how to create spaces that support your actual everyday life. So grab the book for yourself or a gift, and it's cute on a bookshelf. And I will see you next week. That's all I got. So bye.
Thanks for listening. And if you've got more episodes to catch up on, binge on. Don't let me stop you. But if you've got a second, you should come say hi on Insta at MakeSpacePod. And if you're an overachiever, you can also leave a review and I'll love you forever. If you're new here, hit that follow button to officially become a DIY queen and join all the amazing humans tuning in every week.